All right, everybody. It is Thursday, December 24th, 2020, and this is the Fight Business Podcast. I'm your host, Patrick Auger. Happy holidays out there, whether you're a Christmas person, a Hanukkah, Kwanzaa, what have you. I hope you're enjoying the holiday season. I'm hoping you're getting time off work and you're ready to, ring in the new year in a good way. Today, we're going to cover a lot of topics because we've had a lot of news right before the end of the year. We're going to cover McGregor's pay-per-view buys, what that means, especially given the estimates we had going into this, and now we have actual confirmation from Conor McGregor, who tweeted that out. We're going to talk about the UFC antitrust lawsuit. Obviously had a big update there. I've done another video with it with Drake. I highly suggest you check that one out. We're just going to touch on a couple key points, essentially, and nothing too much new other than the big news. It's been class certified. We're also going to talk about Anthony Pettis' big move to PFL, his management company, his fighter management company. I think that played a lot into this. I think there's some reasons he may have gone to the PFL rather than Bellator. We're going to dive into that a little bit and much more. So make sure you like and subscribe. Turn on that notification button so you get notifications whenever our videos drop. And end of the year podcast from me, I want to thank all you guys for the awesome support for this. I love the comments and feedback. Keep them coming. Love talking about business side of MMA with you guys. So just thank you so much. And we've got big plans for 2021, so definitely stay tuned. With that in mind, let's go ahead and dive right in. So the first news I want to get to is Conor McGregor's pay-per-view buy numbers. Now, if you didn't see this, McGregor went ahead and tweeted out what his actual pay-per-view buy numbers were for UFC 246. Kind of a self-congratulatory tweet saying, he had the highest pay-per-view buy rate for the UFC in 2020, congratulated Donald Cerrone, saying, hey, you get this money, which, I am not sure Donald got the same deal that McGregor did. Talking to Cerrone before the McGregor fight, he kind of hinted that he wasn't getting necessarily the big pay-per-view buy numbers. That could have changed, but, either way, McGregor's out there putting out actual pay-per-view numbers, and this has several ramifications. First off, biggest takeaway by far is if you go to Google and you search UFC 246 estimated pay-per-view buys, you're going to see a lot of articles from January 20th, right around the event, where they're talking about what the estimations were. And the indicators and the estimations all end up being around 2 million. That's what a lot of places said. TalkSport, the MacLife, a bunch of places. Now, a couple weeks later, there were some revisions, but let's be honest, those first numbers that come out are usually what stays in the mind of a lot of fans. In this case, McGregor, you probably have more fans checking up on the numbers, or if somebody comes up and says, hey, it's actually way different, you go back and you end up seeing, okay, it's McGregor, so I might, as a semi-casual fan, I might see that. As a hardcore fan that maybe pays attention to the business a little bit, I might see that. But still, those initial numbers are what a lot of people grab onto. And obviously, the projected numbers here were 1.28 million buys. Almost a difference of 700,000 pay-per-view buys. A little bit more, honestly, in terms of the projected number. What actually happened, you got 1.3 million, and there's a reason you have projected and actual, which we'll get to, and why they split those out for the actual receipt that they paid to Conor. But again, biggest takeaway here is don't believe these estimations. Ever since, the initial ones anyway, ever since we went behind the paywall for ESPN Plus, you've got one or two sources that come out and say, hey, this is what the event did, or this is what I'm hearing the event did. It's so different than it used to be. Before we had ESPN Plus being the sole pay-per-view provider, you could check with various sources across, DirecTV, or even Amazon got into the game late, right? You could use lots of different companies and get sources from lots of different companies to at least get a pretty accurate range. Now you've got one source of truth, that is ESPN Plus, and it's much more locked down. It's harder to get those numbers. There's a reason Dave Meltzer, who, from Wrestling Observer newsletter, isn't out there constantly tweeting about the numbers anymore. He doesn't have those sources. They're all behind one wall now. They're all consolidated. So when you see these estimates, especially from some people, as I've talked about on this show, I won't name names, but there's one person in particular who keeps saying, oh, these are the numbers. And then it was revealed on a podcast he was on. They're coming from Dana White. Dana's a promoter. He's going to say those things. He's going to talk about those things in terms of just making the numbers big, even if they're not quite accurate. He's going to say the indications are this. That's his job. I totally understand that. But you can't latch onto those numbers and think, oh, estimated 2 million? Wow. Yeah, brought in 2 million. Conor's just a mega draw. Doesn't matter who he's against. As it turns out, it's very different than, say, Conor and Khabib, right? About 50% less pay-per-view buys than Conor and Khabib. More than 50%, somewhere 55, 60 range, I think. But you get the point. So don't believe those initial numbers every time. It's simply too hard to get accurate numbers. The fact that Conor tweeted this out and that we have accurate numbers is also just kind of mind-blowing for a couple reasons. One, I am sure somewhere in his contract there is a non-disclosure agreement that he violated by tweeting out those numbers. I am 100% positive there's a trade secret clause or something. The UFC could go after him and be like, what the hell are you doing? You can't do that. Are they going to? I doubt it, because Conor is still too valuable an asset. Obviously, he's saying he brought in the most pay-per-views for the year. I think that's true. I do not believe that Usman and Masvidal brought in more pay-per-view buys than McGregor did. If anything, you might see a graphic that says, oh, Conor and Cerrone, 1.35 million. Usman Masvidal, 1.3. Adesanya, 700 versus Costa, 700K. And Cerrone, or I'm sorry, not Cerrone, Gaethje versus Ferguson, 700K. If anything, I'm a little bit more suspicious of the other three events numbers now, because this is pretty clear cut that those initial estimates were off, that they were not accurate, and they were off by a large margin. How much? I don't know. But again, the numbers we've been told from the one or two sources, I know I don't trust one of those sources. There is another source, I would say, the Sports Business Journal, I believe, is the other source that I've seen numbers from. Trust that a little bit more, because I believe them to do the due diligence there. I think that I think that they still could be wrong, obviously, but I think they probably do a little bit more due diligence, and it's not probably coming from Dana in kind of that promoter fashion. Who knows, but that would be my guess. All that being said, Conor, doing this, UFC is not really going to go after him because it's not worth it. He's still too much money. For the promotion, and they will probably talk to him. I'm sure Dana is pissed and probably sent him an angry text, or maybe had a call and was like, what are you doing? But they're not going to sue him. They're not going to try and get him, embroiled in a legal battle with McGregor, especially when he's got a fight against Poirier coming up here in January. There's no way. They need him. They need his pull. They're not going to do that. Then the last part I want to cover on this topic is the projected versus actual, right? The projected pay-per-view buys. I'm sure what ESPN does, is think of that kind of like an accounts payable in a way. It basically estimates, hey, this is based on all of our indications. This is what we estimate to be the overall number of pay-per-view buys that UFC 246 did. Now, that's obviously several thousand short from what the actual was. But as they come in, and again, as people buy pay-per-views after the event, right? I think that's a big portion of this, is you don't know how many people are going to buy the pay-per-view, say, the next day. There are people that, probably went to work or were working or sleeping, especially abroad, right? Depending on the time zone there. I feel for you fans in the UK, Australia. I mean, my heart goes out to you guys, especially the UK ones, because you guys. But not only did you have to go between the special, I believe it's BT Sports, you had to pay for that this time because of UFC 246, but then the hours you have to watch it, that's just rough. So I'm sure a lot of people ended up sleeping and then, watching it the next day or maybe later in the week. It just avoided spoilers. I've done that before in rare circumstances. I had a birthday celebration where people I was with were not into MMA, and it was someone's birthday. We were having a good party. I was like, I'm going to be present, and I missed UFC 205. I didn't see it live. I basically was like, this is one of my best friend's birthday. I have to kind of miss this, and I ended up holding off until the end of the work week. That happens, right? It's not ideal, but it happens. So they probably do a projected estimate so that they can pay Conor the majority of the money up front, because I'm sure the contract says something like that. But then you're going to have a couple thousand buys that kind of trickle in, right, after the fact, whether it's a couple days later, a day later, what have you. And, I'm sure McGregor would rather get paid the majority of the money and then have them reconcile it versus, waiting until everything is said and done and, oh, here's the final pay-per-view number. So I think that's a big part of it too. That's why you see those actual versus projected. That's where those numbers, and yes, those projections are that accurate. Trust me, when you're in business and you do projections like that for, essentially selling large amounts and quantities of product, they are usually down to the ones place. If you have 1.28 million, you don't just round that off to, 1,280,000. No, you usually use some metrics to get an idea of this is how exact we're going to be all the way down to the ones. That happens a lot. So don't be shocked by that on the projected side. It isn't fake. Everyone I've talked to, again, has verified it. I mean, it looked real to me originally, but I wanted to double check. So, that's why you had projected versus actual. Again, to wrap this up, it's an interesting move by McGregor. I love it because we get actual pay-per-view buys. It shows just how wrong some of those initial estimates are, and even revisions. Some of the revisions too. I struggle to think off the top of my head who had an accurate revision following UFC 246. So, it's one of those things where you got to be careful of those numbers when they come out. And, hopefully Conor doesn't get sued. If he does, I'd be shocked, but I technically left himself legally open. So I don't know, guys. It's great to see actual pay-per-view numbers, though. I will say that. Actual pay-per-view numbers for a change, makes my heart warm. So the next thing I want to cover very quickly before we move on to some other topics here is the UFC antitrust lawsuit update. So if you haven't seen, we have another video where I talk with Drake Riggs and we talk about it being class certified. Yes, Judge Boulware did grant class certification in the UFC antitrust lawsuit. It is a big deal and it's not a big deal. It's a big deal because the UFC lawsuit now, or the UFC essentially has to appeal it and the lawsuit lives on, right? Boulware said multiple times, if I don't grant class certification, this lawsuit's dead. And plaintiff said it. Every expert I've talked to said it. So Boulware essentially said, you know what? Nope. We're going to go ahead and move forward with class certification, which means that between 2010 and 2017, if you fought for the UFC, you are now part of a group of fighters that are suing the UFC for monopoly antitrust violations unless you opt out. You can opt out, which I'm sure some fighters will do, but you're essentially going to get something in the mail that says, hey, by the way, you are now part of a class action lawsuit. What it doesn't mean is we're going to hear anything about the contracts or any damages that the plaintiffs might win or any settlements anytime soon. The UFC has appealed this. The appellate court can take its time to hear this case. Jason Cruz mentioned, looking at the way that court is structured, the particular appellate court that this now goes to, it could be another 5 years before it's all said and done based on if that appellate court kicks it back down to the lower courts after they've ruled on certain parts of it, whether they decide to wait and hear the appeal. It could be 5 years just to, get to the next step. And mind you, if we get through the appellate court and let's say the appellate court upholds it, then I'm sure the UFC will appeal again to the Supreme Court. And when you get to that, when you get to that stage, who knows how long it could take? Who knows if they'll even hear it? It's so far from over. It's a big step. It's a big deal. But again, one of many. So stay tuned. I will keep you, glued in and tuned in with any updates that I hear. But if I'm being honest, it's not going to be for a long time. Here is the caveat with that, though. There were several documents that were sealed in the evidentiary hearings that happened last year, right? We talked about some of this where we had some redacted documents. We had a couple of documents that just weren't released at all, but those documents may be unsealed, which is a very big deal because some of those documents are going to have things like Brock Lesnar's agreement with the UFC, for one, as well as different, pay-per-view actual numbers and models between 2010 and 2016, where a lot of those numbers stop. We had a bunch of information. John Nash from Bloody Elbow, of course, who's been covering this since day one with Jason Cruz and Paul Gift. Him and Paul and Jason all have pictures of documents on their Twitter. John especially, if you go search through his Twitter, I know it's a bit of a hassle because it's been a while now, but if you go through and you look at those documents, you've got real financial numbers there, and you've got some actual court documents where you've got these redactions. they may become unsealed. The UFC had until December 15th to say, hey, is there a reason why we need to keep these sealed, and make an argument for that before Bullware decides, hey, this needs to be released to the public, and we need to keep this sealed for proprietary reasons or what have you. Bullware hasn't released those as far as I know yet. I am checking on that regularly. I'm looking for anything from, those three, Gift, Cruz, and Nash. If they say anything on, we've done that, we now have those documents released. So as soon as I get my hands on them, which I plan to do, I will be writing about it. I'll be doing videos about it. There could be some very cool information in there about specifics of contracts. I know Brock Lesnar's contract is one of the sealed documents. That would be very interesting to see what his very special contract is, because he's kind of, in that realm of Rousey and McGregor, where he's going to have a very unique contract. So I will keep you guys updated as soon as I hear anything on that end. That will hopefully come, and hopefully we get a lot of these unsealed, by the new year. But I'm going to keep checking on that regularly. But stay tuned for anything of that nature. Otherwise, in terms of the case moving forward, it's going to be a bit so, get some popcorn, live your life. And in a couple years, hopefully we're talking about where, the appellate court made their decision. Next thing I want to cover is Dana White's PR video. If you haven't seen this already, he tweeted out something, and the official UFC accounts tweeted out something that's essentially this video that says that, everyone said we couldn't do it, and here's, our social media impressions have gone up. Here's how much money we raised. We didn't lose any jobs in the pandemic. It targets a lot of journalists. You've got many journalists who are called out there by name, pictures of them as well. I'm not going to go into my personal thoughts on it, because that's not why you guys tuned into this. There are plenty of videos, including our own Ant Walker and Matthew Wells, who did their reactions to that video. Not going to go that route. What I will discuss is the business side of this. And yes, there is very much a business side of this. That video is a brilliant PR move by Dana White. It's a very good PR move, and here's why. Obviously, there's been a lot of criticism from the UFC about the way that they handled the pandemic initially, right? When you had the Tachi's Palace debacle, where Disney actually had to step in, when you had, several media members saying, are they going to test people? What's going on here? All of this stuff. There was a lot of flack and criticism on Dana White and the UFC for not having the right protocols in place. You got to UFC 249, and you had stringent testing, it seemed. You had a whole bunch of this stuff where a lot of the media was satisfied. But either way, initially, the UFC got a lot of flack for that. The fact that Disney had to step in isn't the best PR move, right? You had big publications like the New York Times, several different places in more mainstream media picking this up and saying, what is going on here? Yeah, John Oliver did his segment on the UFC, right? You had mostly mainstream coverage that was criticism of the way the UFC was moving forward, the way they were doing things. You didn't have a ton then later, saying, they've, really stepped up. They've done very well, which they did on Fight Island. They did for a lot of the year. I think more recently, as we've seen with coronavirus tests, they're not in bubbles, so you've got kind of a lot of positive tests now. There's some criticism there, obviously, from the media, but either way, that initial damage was done at the beginning of the year. That's not something that Disney, a family corporation, wants to be out there. That, hey, yeah, we're partnering with the UFC, and ESPN is our we own them, and yeah, we had to literally call them after the governor of California called us and asked us to do this. Wasn't the greatest PR move. What White's done here has taken that and tried to turn it around, right? The way he's done it, there are some questionable things. You've had Jedi Goodman on Twitter has a great clip of the, Helwani being in there, Ariel Helwani, where he says something to the effect of, no one thinks this should be happening. And then he shows the actual context of that clip where he's kind of taking out of context, right? There was a fair bit of that. You have one story that was actually talking about fighters wanting more pay, wasn't even involved with the pandemic, but the UFC highlighted that as well. Again, you've got some ethical quandaries there. But from a business PR move, it's great because it's essentially appealing to the fans, the casual and diehard fans that I will be one to admit. A lot of fans don't care for the MMA media, especially MMA media that goes against the grain of putting on fights, doing that stuff. This was a great way to rile those fans up, to make them feel like, yeah, the UFC won, and to kind of pronounce a victory of, yeah, the media said we couldn't do this. So many of these guys said we couldn't do this. And look, we did it because we're unstoppable. It really sheds this light of, from a PR sense, we are a very strong company that achieves the unthinkable. That's the kind of PR message they got across. Was despite what people may say, despite what you may hear on criticisms of the UFC, we can prove them wrong, and we do prove them wrong every single time. And that's the message that they projected. And a lot of fans, if you go and look at, a lot of fans and some pundits, they say, oh, savage. I think Brendan Schaub was like, yeah, oh, savage. It's just like, well, again, given the context, everything else, there are some quandaries there. But it worked, is the point. From a business perspective, it 100% worked. It got a lot of fans saying, yeah, the media doesn't know what they're talking about. Yeah, Dana dunked on him, all this stuff. Okay, that works. In this day and age, especially with that fan base, that works for a lot of people. There will be fans that see through it and say, man, this is ridiculous. But there will be a lot of fans that look at that and say, yeah, man, whoa, who knows? Especially the semi-casual fans. That's a huge part of it too. They made that promo not only to try and get some of the hardcore fans that love the UFC, to feel like, yeah, we won, but also to get the guys that don't pay attention every fight night to look at that and say, oh, yeah, I guess the media was totally wrong. Right? Like, if I'm tuning in for a McGregor pay-per-view, maybe an Adesanya pay-per-view, one or two other big pay-per-views, and I'm not following the UFC much otherwise, and then I see that promo, I'm going to think, man, the media really went hard on Dana, huh? In the UFC, they really thought it couldn't be done. Like, oh, yeah, they just thought they couldn't open, all this stuff. And they're going to think that Dana and the UFC, proved them wrong. And that's a big part of it too, because they want those casual buys, obviously. That's a huge part of their business. They still want casual and semi-casual fans to buy their big pay-per-views to make them more money. And that is the message that will resonate with those semi-casual and casual fans because it's more wide-reaching, right? It was trending on Twitter. Yes, there will be opinions that any casual or semi-casual, if they wanted to dive into it, could educate themselves, make the decision. But if you just seeing the headline, you just see the video, you may think, oh, yeah, man, Dana really, showed them without knowing the whole story there, without being fully informed of the facts to make your own decision. And you may, again, go through all the facts and think, oh, yeah, no, Dana really showed him there. But the point is, great PR move by the UFC. Brilliant PR move by Dana. I know a lot of people say it's petty. I know a lot of people think it's hilarious and it's an ego thing. Yeah, it easily could be. I have my thoughts on that as well. But regardless, from a business perspective, great move. Just an all-around incredible move. And that's the truth of it. Another topic I want to touch on briefly before we go into our last two topics of the year here. Talked about this in another video with my man, Drake Riggs. UFC is going to be on ABC, apparently, come January 16th, according to MMA Junkie. That's a big deal. Here's why. Short version. This is Disney betting on the UFC. Keep in mind, UFC hasn't signed a broadcast deal with ABC, similar to what they did with ESPN Plus. That's still the main broadcast partner. But Disney owns ESPN Plus, and ABC. And what this is Disney essentially saying, oh, you know what? We like the numbers we have on the back end so much, we're going to go ahead and promote the UFC to network television. We're going to get more eyeballs. It's not going to be the same thing as Fox. If you're thinking it's just like Fox, that's not the case. As I said in the other video, really what this is Disney trying to market the UFC as a reason to buy ESPN Plus. I think that they know, as they've said recently here, especially with the coronavirus, wreaking havoc on their theme parks and some of their live in-person events that, Disney made a lot of money from. They're going all in on streaming. They're really trying to bulk up their offerings through streaming platforms like Hulu and Disney Plus and ESPN Plus to go that route and get money that route so that they're secure. They'll still have theme parks and everything else, but that's really where they want to shift. They want to go from this physical, magical Disney World thing into a streaming service that gives them guaranteed revenue regardless of what happens with coronavirus or anything else going on in the physical world. So what they're doing here is saying on the back end, they've seen enough growth from ESPN Plus subscribers, which I think that's a major part of this. Remember, when you had Dillashaw versus Henry Cejudo being the first event on ESPN Plus subscribership just skyrocketed. Disney touted it. You had, again, the earnings call where Disney said on their earnings, like, we're very happy with the UFC bringing in subscribers and, 1 million plus pay-per-view buys for Cerrone and McGregor, right? They said over 1 million pay-per-view buys. They didn't specify how much. We've already talked about that, but, that touting that on a Disney earning calls means they're very happy. If you're hearing Disney talk about UFC on an earnings call, that means they are extremely happy about those numbers. So I think the ratings could be hit and miss. I think as long as it's not a total bomb where they're just like in the gutter, you're going to see 4 or 5 stacked-ish or at least big main event cards on ABC going forward, because what Disney is trying to do is say, hey, check out this awesome, UFC sport that you probably never seen before, kids or whoever, and, or maybe they've heard of it and now they're watching like, oh, Holloway versus Qatar, great main event, an exciting fight. That might get you interested in becoming a fight fan. Oh, I want to watch the next event. Where do I have to go? Oh, ESPN Plus. I've got to sign up and watch that. Maybe I become a hardcore fan. That's what this is. This is trying to market to people they may have missed and people that they can't reach behind the ESPN Plus paywall. ESPN does that to an extent as well, right? When you have fight nights on ESPN and so forth. But this is a much wider audience. This is network television. No one's paying extra for these channels. This is, a staple channel that's there on pretty much any free TV service. So they're trying to reach out to those people and trying to get them to say, hey, it's only $6 a month. And it's a deal if you buy it for a year. Come on, join up so you can watch this new sport and become a fan. That's what this is, all a marketing ploy. Even if the ratings are big the first event and then just go down in the toilet, kind of like what they did with Fox towards the end there, right? It's not the same where Fox was trying to use the UFC as a way to bolster their ratings. That was trying to be, let's get people watching Fox. It wasn't let's get people watching the UFC. This, on the other hand, completely different. This is let's get people to essentially buy ESPN Plus. Let's use UFC on ABC to do that. And that's what this is here. Next thing I want to talk about is One Championship. Now, if you're on Twitter at all, I'm sure you've seen the tweet that kind of set off a huge debate where someone tweeted out that, One has surpassed the UFC and you're a casual if you only watch the UFC because it's surpassed by 1.8 billion views. Got a lot of traction in MMA Twitter. A lot of people saying, what the heck? Some people agreeing with it. Okay, that's, we'll see about that. We'll get to that in a minute, but another set of tweets that I want to focus on. If you look at Globe SVCS, he tweeted out a thread where Sports Pro Asia interviewed Chatri Sitchedong, who says a lot of things here. Among them, if you follow my Twitter feed, you would have seen the tweet I retweeted, among them saying that One Championship is going to be bigger than the NFL, the MLB, EPL, he lists just about Champions League. He lists about every type of thing under the sun. It says One Championship is going to be bigger than that. In that thread, he also talks about, One Championship is a year out from 12 months out from profitability, breaking even and profitable. Also talks about, honor and that Angela Lee, is someone that a mother would be proud to show a poster of Angela Lee in their kid's bedroom versus some of these other UFC fighters. The most important tweet in that thread, and shout out to him again, Jonathan as well, is the tweet Jonathan says, where if you've ever been in the startup world, this sounds like a pitch. 100% does. As someone who's done consulting and worked for startups and with startups, I can tell you, this is the startup pitch. It's a lot of, hey, here's the competition. Here's the, oh yeah, we compare ourselves to the competition. We could be better. If they could do it, why can't we? All of that stuff that is said in that tweet talking about the startup world is very deadly accurate. And that's what this is. It's Chatri going out and pitching one championship to some of these media companies to make them seem like this giant force. Make them seem, yes, we'll be profitable. Don't worry about that. We're going to be bigger than NFL, MLB. We're going to be this huge, massive entity. Yeah, we're honorable, right? The UFC, Bellator. No, we're an honorable company. That's all this is. If you don't believe me, go look up at any video on startup pitches. There's tons of shows that do, I think T-Pain has a show where he's talking about, goes around and talks to startups and says, oh, this is a cool idea, what have you. You've got a bunch of different shows that say, oh, you've got an elevator pitch and then, oh, yeah, we like it. We're going to hear you out. Shark Tank is the biggest example by far. If you haven't heard of Shark Tank, well, I can't help you. But if you've heard of the show Shark Tank, that's what they do too. They say, yeah, we can hit this amount of revenue. Yes, we can be bigger than them. We found a hole, a need that we're filling with this. That's what this is. This is a more accurate version of that. Rather than the televised Shark Tank version, it's what you would actually hear in a pitch meeting of investors. Closed door, investors listening to a startup who's trying to pitch and say, yes, here's what we can do. That's what this is. That tweet, the 1.8 billion views, those views are, I disputed, is to say the least. There's no hard evidence just saying they're false. There's no hard evidence really saying they're true. I mean, you've got debating sources there. Obviously, in Japan and China, in that thread that Jonathan put out, you could see where Ryzen is far higher than one. One is not trending much at all. Searches aren't anyway. It's hard to say, though, again. You can use a lot of different data and metrics to make yourself look really good or really bad. Data is manipulable, if that's a word. I'm going to say able to be manipulated. It's very easily something that can be manipulated in the right set of hands. So I won't go into the 1.8 billion views. I don't believe that to be true. I would be shocked if that is legit, that those were all 100% real people tuning into one, because I don't know how they wouldn't be profitable from merchandise and things and ticket sales alone. But this is Chatri doing his pitch to media, to potential investors, right? They just did another round of funding not that long ago, this year, where they needed to add to their war chest. Bloody Elbow talked about it. John Nash got flack from Chatri about it. They were definitely, based on their corporate filings that they did with Singapore's government, they were definitely in the red. And they increased their losses from the previous year. So it's a startup type interview. It's a startup type pitch. And that's what one championship really is. It's important to note that. A lot of people are saying, yes, they're up there on the same level now with Bellator and the UFC. That's not true. They may have big fighters. They may have people I love watching one championship fights. It's great. I've got a lot of great friends who cover one championship in depth. I would love for them to be successful and a big player in the market. I think it makes free agency better. I think you could see a lot more people like Eddie Alvarez. You could see other guys like Anthony Pettis, who just went to PFL, and we'll talk about here in a second, could go to one championship. You have a lot of possibilities there. But they are still very much a startup. That is what they are. They're still in that startup phase. They haven't reached the growth phase to the point where they can then mature and be on that same level. I'm not putting PFL in there for a reason, because PFL is also pretty much still a startup. They've got big investors. You've got Kevin Hart. You've got big celebrity investors. Fine. That's all well and good. They're still a startup too. And they, I think, have a little bit more money in terms of being able to land Pettis and kind of, do what they're doing, because they don't have a huge roster, right? Obviously, they might have the smallest roster based on the way that their tournament format is. But nevertheless, one is still in that startup stage. It's important to remember that. Before you go and say, yes, one is a major competitor in UFC, one is just, a major player now. It's as big as Bellator. It's one of the big three. That's not really true. It's still a startup. They are doing well with the names they have. They're doing great in promotion. I will say that. Even Chatri doing this type of thing. Yeah, that works for a lot of startups. You get more investor money, obviously, as they did this past year. But they aren't in a secure place yet, financially, which is very important. I mean, a story that was out there but kind of went under the radar is you had all these things about one cutting people. That was covered in Nash's story about their losses. They cut a lot of their corporate and event staff. And there were rumors it was even more than they actually announced. So, I mean, they are not a guaranteed thing. We've seen other promotions that look powerful, look strong, go under, right? We saw Strike Force. We saw Pride. I mean, those were different eras, different reasons, right? But still, the point is, it's not a guaranteed thing that one is this major player. It is important to know that. I think they're on the right path. I think if they can actually turn profitable in 12 months, then they are very much on the right path. But right now, when you hear Chatri saying these things, when you hear tweets like 1.8 billion views, don't believe the hype. This is a don't believe the hype moment from a business perspective. They are a startup. Could they end up being a major force financially in MMA? Yes, that is still very much possible. Are they there now? No. Very important to recognize that difference because they are acting like they're already there because that's what startups do. That's what any startup company will do that, right? Oh, I got a ton of money. I got investments. Cool. Let's go. I mean, that's what startups do. So don't believe that they are a sure thing just yet because they still have to get the financials to back it up. All right, last thing I want to hit on real quick is Anthony Pettis' move to PFL. Why am I talking about this? Well, we've talked about on previous episodes here about different fighters being cut. I don't think this was a cut. I think this was Pettis essentially saying, I don't want to be a gatekeeper. My guess is, and you can kind of tell this, when he decided not to renegotiate his contract before his last fight against Morono, right? My guess is that they probably had some discussions, and Pettis is viewed very much like Romero. A bigger name, a name that can be used for gatekeepers, right? Romero revealed in his first interview since being cut from the UFC that he wanted to move up to 205. He wanted to fight contenders. He wanted to go after Adesanya again, do all this stuff. They wanted him to fight Derek Brunson, who's on the rise right now, or fight a couple of these lower guys and essentially be a gatekeeper. And I'm sure they weren't going to pay him more money either, right? And it's very possible in Romero's contract. It says if you're fighting a certain ranked contender, you get this much. If you're lower than that, this much. I wouldn't be shocked if there are things in those, like basically clauses and provisions in contracts that make it so that UFC fighters get paid differently depending on who they're fighting, not just championship, right? Especially now that we have no disclosure from Nevada State Athletic Commission and a lot of other commissions, very, very possible that there are provisions in there. And so when you're looking at Pettis, he went 11-9 in the UFC. He's 6-8 since he lost the belt. He's still got skill, obviously. He did well against Morono. He talked about wanting to go back down to lightweight, but he's not making a title run, or at least it didn't look like he's making a title run anytime soon. He's 34. He's still relatively young, but he's had a lot of, miles on him, which I talked about in a video I did with Drake about where he might go to. But I mean, he's not the Showtime Pettis that we know at 26 who won the belt, right? He doesn't seem to have that same athleticism that he used to, and a lot of his skills, while they've been improving, and he's had the mental stuff going on, it seems like he got the mental stuff fixed with a coach. But he, whether or not the athleticism was necessary for him to pull off the type of skills that he needs to be Showtime Pettis, that could be true. He might have to fight a different style of fight. As you get older, of course, as you get more wars, as your body, doesn't heal the same way. Changes happen. If you're 25, 26 right now, or are you younger and you're like, oh man, I could, drink all day and then wake up the next day and maybe have a hangover for like 2 hours or not even have a hangover and then I'm good. Man, let me tell you, as a 31-year-old, that shit goes away. It goes away quickly. I'm only 31, and I can tell you that sometimes I have like 3 or 4 drinks. I'm a little bit drunk, not even that drunk. And I'm like, cool, I'm good, drink some water. And I'm out the next day with a hangover. It's nuts. Your body breaks down at different points for different people in different ways. It's very possible Pettis is kind of, feeling that. And he's definitely past his athletic prime. There's no doubt about that. So for him to keep fighting the UFC, my guess is the UFC said, yeah, you're a big enough name, of course, but we're going to have you fight contenders. We're going to make you a gatekeeper, right? They're going to be, hey, here's an up-and-coming guy that's, making his way through welterweight or making his way through lightweight. Let's give him Pettis, because if he beats Pettis, that's a former champ. That can, jump him up to a higher level, all that stuff. That's the type of guy that the UFC loves to feed to someone like Khamzat Chimaev, who's just a surging contender, right? He's gone from unranked dudes, really one guy that was brand new to the UFC at welterweight, to fighting Leon Edwards at number 3. They love to feed those guys people like Pettis as a good gatekeeper. Say, okay, we're not sure if he's ready for that just yet. Maybe we're not 100% in on him. Let's give him Anthony Pettis. If he doesn't win, cool. It's Anthony Pettis doing his thing. Yeah, Showtime gets another win. Nostalgia. Gonna get more eyes, on it because it's Showtime. So some of the older fans are gonna watch because Pettis is fighting again. If he does win, or I'm sorry, if the contender does win, then you've got the older fans being like, oh, this kid must be really good. And you've got casual fans being, wow, he beat Pettis, former champ. Wow, that's what it's all about. And that's what they wanted to use him as. In terms of going to the PFL, if you watched the video that me and Drake did, obviously we were pretty set on him going to Bellator. But I did say that the PFL was a dark horse candidate. I think I only gave 5%, not much. But still, I said it was possible, and here we are. I think this is a brilliant move by Pettis for a couple reasons. One, when you're looking at where Pettis is in his career, again, I think he can do very well in the PFL. And ultimately, the PFL has the highest payout guaranteed for anyone, right? As I mentioned before, they are a startup. They are not a financially secure institution. There's no telling how long they will keep going. They are still doing seeding funding rounds. They're not a company that's making enough money that they themselves can pay out the $1 million bonuses and payouts for the winner of the season, and then, cover their employee costs, event costs, all that, and then turn a profit. They're not there yet. They're trying to get there. That's the whole pitch. They've got big investors. They're really going for it, but they're a startup. So how long the PFL continues is still up in the air. It's very possible 2 or 3 years if things don't go their way, and obviously 2020 did not go their way. That was between the fighters getting upset, them having to pay a stipend and canceling their season when then other promotions resumed. Obviously 2020 was a big setback for them. And being how new they are as a startup, even though they were World Series of Fighting, yes, being how new they are with their investments that they have, that's never a good thing. So there is, a possibility that in 2 or 3 years, PFL goes under. Will they? I can't say right now. I hope they don't, because I love the format. I love what they're doing, but it's possible. By Pettis going to them now, if he truly thinks he's still got it, and I mean, again, he's still competing with big names. He still beat Wonderboy Thompson, even though Thompson was beating the crap out of him until the end of that fight. He beat Michael Chiesa. He beat tough guys. So it's not like he's fallen off a cliff here. It's not like he's hit that point where it's like, okay, maybe you should hang him up. He's just not going to compete with the top 5 and the champions of the welterweight or lightweight divisions in the UFC right now, especially with how deep both those divisions are. In PFL, he can go to 155. Or if they do a 170, again, could easily go there too. I don't know where he would go. I would imagine 155 based on what he was saying in the post-fight interview against Alex Morono. But point is, he can go to either of those divisions and say, hey, yeah, I want to fight in this division. And if he thinks he's still better than those guys, he can win $1 million, guaranteed. And I would probably put him, when the tournament starts, I'd probably be a betting favorite for Pettis. I'm sure he will be a betting favorite to win whichever tournament he enters. Welterweight, actually, I'll take that back. Welterweight, I'm not sure because Rory's there too, right? But lightweight for sure. I think even though Nathan Schultz is obviously shown he's very skilled, I think Pettis would be the odds-on favorite to win a lightweight tournament in the PFL. And why not? Because you can always do that too for a couple of years and then say, now I'm going to go to Bellator. Because my guess is Bellator will still want him. Bellator's still got good matchups like MVP. If he beats enough people, look at welterweight, go Douglas Lima. If he wants to go to 155, where Chandler is now left, there's a vacuum there. You've got, Patricio and Patricky, but there's a vacuum there that Pettis could certainly take advantage of and possibly throw himself into title contention extremely quickly. So that's still going to be there. Unless Pettis falls off a cliff this year, he can do this for a year, and if it works out, great. He gets $1 million, and then he could bounce to Bellator. Or do it for 2 years and then say, awesome, I'm going to bounce. But why not? If you're going to make that move, you might as well make it now. And I think it's a smart business decision. Another thing that's important, Pettis did start essentially a fighter management group, which is important because as someone managing fighters now, right? I think being in the PFL helps him a little bit more. He's more likely to have pull to get maybe some guys he manages into the PFL now that he's one of the biggest names there. In the UFC, yeah, sure. You could, of course, if they're up to snuff, if Mick Maynard, Sean Shelby like them, then come on in. But you got a lot of stars there, and Pettis isn't, the top of the food chain. PFL, it's him and Rory are the biggest names by far. You've got Kayla Harrison as a homegrown star, sure, but the biggest names in the casual MMA fan community in PFL are Rory McDonald and Anthony Pettis. And when you're sitting as one of the promotion's top names, you can then say, hey, you know what? I've got a couple fighters here that I think would be great for the tournament or that you should sign and take a look at. And PFL's probably like, yeah, sure. Especially if he's drawing in the ratings that, I'm sure PFL did the math and thought, yeah, he could probably bring us some numbers here. It makes sense. It's a smart move as a side business as well. He's got his own gym going on. He's got fighter management. This is a brilliant move by a fighter who is now entering a phase in his career where he can still compete at a very high level. He can get a lot of money, especially in the PFL, and then he can get more, sustainable, structured income through managing fighters who then fight for the PFL. Because that's a lot easier to do than, getting people in the UFC. And yes, there obviously is Ali Abdelaziz, who has a lot of fighters in the PFL. If you haven't checked out some of the work that Michael Fidel has done for us or some of the other tweets out there about the amount of fighters that were in the tournament at the end of the year for PFL, the last season that they did, and how many of them were managed by Ali Abdelaziz. But that being said, there is obviously room for him to kind of insert himself there. UFC, that's tough. You've got Rousey, who had Edmund Shabazian, but it's not like Rousey's pulling in tons of fighters to fight in the UFC. It's still rough because of just how crowded it is. He can be the bigger fish in the smaller pond in PFL as a manager as well as a fighter. Great move for him. I think it makes all the business sense in the world, and I think a lot of the guys that we love to see that want to still compete, I think they should take a lesson from him. All right, guys. Well, that wraps up 2020 here for the Fight Business Podcast. Not going to be doing a podcast next week unless something big happens, and then I'll be on here, but otherwise don't expect one. We'll be back January 4th. We're going to have a little bit of a new setup, have some new things, working on some things over the holidays. I hope you have a great holidays with your families. I hope that you enjoy the time off of the UFC. Don't forget to check out our Rise and Intermission show here. Me and Drake Riggs are doing a Rise and Intermission show. Even if you don't watch that, make sure you watch Ryzen 26 because that's going to be a killer card. Totally worth it. But you should check out our intermission show too because, of course, why not? Anyway, really appreciate you guys helping me grow this into what it's become the past year. I've started this Fight Business Podcast a couple times in the past. Didn't really get enough traction, kind of let it go. This time it really, sustained enough views and sustained enough feedback. It was worth it for me to keep going. I love doing this stuff, so I want to thank each and every one of you that have watched these, that are regular watchers. If you're new, again, welcome. I just want to take the time to say thank you so much. It's really been great, especially given the year we've had. So really, thank you guys. And make sure you like and subscribe to the channel. Hit me up with any feedback over the holidays you want on this, on anything else. I'm always down to talk MMA business. Twitter and Instagram handle is right there. Yeah, right there. So make sure you hit that up. And yeah, thanks a lot, guys. Get money. Enjoy your holidays.